digital projects. If you can just check, if you're not a presenter, if you can just check that your microphone is muted. You're welcome to use the chat during the roundtable to comment and pose questions. And we're going to keep this very conversational. I've asked each project will have 3 to 5 minutes of brief description of the projects to start for those who might not be familiar with them. And then we're going to have some time that's going to be conversation among the panelists around a couple of topics that we've settled on. And then in the last 15 or 20 minutes, I'll open it up to questions and discussion from the audience as well. These are long running projects. We each could probably fill a whole hour just on our own project. So I'm going to have to be the time cop and really keep things moving at certain points. I want to be just very transparent about that. I really appreciate everyone showing up for the last session on what has been a very full, intense program, and really a wonderful conference experience. We put together this roundtable thinking about the fact that there are a number of resources available for people who are just getting started with a digital humanities project. But we have many digital projects in periodical studies that are very long-lived and therefore go through different kinds of changes and updates in content, scope, technology, and so forth. So this roundtable brings together the founders of 3 long-running bibliographic digital projects in periodical studies to discuss their experience and how these projects have changed over time. So I'm going to start. Again, this starts the quick round of descriptions of each project. I'm sharing my screen just because I have a screenshot. And if you can just mute yourself if you're not me, thank you. There's somebody with their microphone on, and I don't have control over that. Thanks. So Periodical Poetry Index is a fully collaborative project between myself, Lindsy Lawrence, and April Patrick, who are also here on the roundtable. And it's a database of information about poems in English language 19th century periodicals. And our project is grounded in principles from periodical studies, and that infuses everything we do at every layer from the back end to the front end. We present bibliographic information as well as metadata about the presentation of the poem in the periodical, which has been a real focus of our research throughout the project. And we do not republish poems in our project. We link to digitized copies of the periodical, sending users whenever possible to that material form, even in its digital surrogate. The project that's on the public server is the older version. We're on the threshold of releasing a new version of the project that's been substantially reimagined, both from the data structure and has a lot of additional data in it as well, and a new design. April and Lindsay will speak to some of those changes, I'm sure, in our conversation. And our new design allows users to browse and filter the contents of the database, select rows from these tables, and then see a modular display of that metadata information that we've been indexing and creating for these items. So I wanted to gesture to that. We'll announce it on the Victoria listserv and so forth when it's live on the public server. But we're still cleaning up a few things before we can put it out there. All right, I'm done with my description of our project. If I can find my Zoom, what did you do with, there we go. Sorry, Zoom disappears. I'm going to turn it over then to Troy to talk about his project.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm Troy Bassett, and my project, I'm going to put the link in the chat here, is at the Circulating Library, a database of Victorian fiction. 1837 to 1901. I started it in 2008. Seems like 1,000 years ago. COVID years. And initially it was 3-volume novels, which I then subsequently wrote a book about. But then over time, it became a database of not just 3-volume fiction, but all Victorian novels published during the period. And currently we have over 22,000 titles listed, with closing in on 6,000 individual authors, identified authors. So a lot of it is attributions as well. And then early on in the project, and this is relevant for RSVP, added serialization information for novels. And I think currently we have over 200, I think, I should have looked up the exact numbers, but I think we're closing in on 300 individual magazines and newspapers that carried serialized fiction. So just a huge amount of data for anyone to look at, and we are also in the midst of updating the website. So I hope by the end of the year to have an announcement to make about that. It'll be much more mobile friendly. That was the one thing that was really annoying about the current site, so that it will look good on your iPhones and iPads, as well as your MacBooks. So I'll just leave it at that.
Hi everyone, I'm Léger-St-Jean. I'm going to drop the link to Price One Penny in the chat. Feel free to go roam on it and half listen to me. Do come back when the discussion starts. So Price One Penny is a bibliography of fiction released in penny weekly numbers between 1837 and 1860 in London. And I have not made Troy's mistake, and I'm looking up the stats. I have 1,073 work entries, which were published in 584 editions and 372 periodical serializations, 66 publisher entries, and 386 author entries. And the reason there are so many authors is because it doesn't include only penny fiction authors, but also the creators of the works that were remediated either through translation, through reprinting, or through adaptation into these penny bloods. And one of the features of Price One Penny, which I realized much later was quite unique, is I already knew this genre of fiction was published in 2 different formats in these serializations within penny weekly periodicals, but also in what I call standalone editions. So a book that is published in 8 pages each week, and then you can bound it together and you have a book. And so I thought through the data structure with these 2 different formats in mind, whereas Troy added serializations later, and that impacts the data structure. And we can talk about that later.
All right, thanks everybody. And so I'd like to hear then from each project about, how did your project start, and what's changed over time? How has it evolved, and maybe what's surprised you along the way? So I think maybe we'll just follow the same order, at least initially, and then, but I'm sure it'll then also flow as conversation. So, Lindsay?
Hi, everyone. So we started in 2010 based on casual conversations at that year's British Women Writers Conference. All three of us were really excited about the possibilities of the project, and we really started from our own investment, curiosity, and some admitted frustrations with poetry being left out of the Wellesley Index. We dove in really quickly. We didn't start with formal DH training sessions of any sort. I think we got the book that Troy suggested on databases at some point in that process. We didn't hire a developer. We didn't seek out grant funding. We just kind of very much learned as we went, kind of organically developing different roles in the project. So, and Natalie took on lead on encoding our data. And we use MySQL, PHP, and JavaScript for that. I think one of the main things, we all committed to this project, despite the fact that none of us live in the same place. And we've never lived in the same place while we've been doing this project. So we really benefited from the growth of both open access resources at the time we started, as well as collaborative tools like Skype and Google Documents to really make the project work. Since we've been working since 2010, lots of things have changed in our processes, as well as like some really specific changes in the project itself, which I think April's going to speak more to in the kind of answering the next question. One big change for us was moving from monthly or even bi-monthly meetings and some really concentrated summer work to meeting weekly. I know this doesn't seem like a really big change, but it was really fundamental for us because we don't live in the same place. And unlike a person doing a single project or working at an institution with collaborators there, we just had to be a lot more intentional. And that weekly meetings made us much more realistic about what we can accomplish in a period of time. We used to set some really lofty goals for ourselves for what we would be able to index and accomplish between meetings. And it means we're more realistic about our timeline. It also means we're, I think we make more progress because we're talking about it every week, and that continuity of conversation is there for us. If you were in the previous session, Marian Grant, I think, asked a really important question of Emily and Allison, which is, what were you envisioning as your audience for the project? And we've really changed who we thought of as our audience, considering undergraduate students, graduate students, and non-specialists as part of that audience versus just RSVP and just us in a kind of sense. It's really led to some deep thinking about how we're displaying the data, which Natalie showed you in the screenshot, and really thinking about the range of users we hope will engage with the project. Some of the surprises along the way has really been the realities of periodical poetry itself. It doesn't do what you think it's going to do. One example is poem length. We just didn't realize that so many poems were over 100 lines. Our initial estimates of those lengths were wrong, and we had to kind of adjust our data structure to accommodate that. We have a now code whenever something odd is happening in Blackwoods. We just say Blackwoods is weird because Blackwoods is weird. And so many of the exceptions to what we thought about periodical poetry, Blackwoods challenged. We're finding that is the case too with Atalanta as we index poetry there. It challenges, again, some of our notions of periodical poetry with illustrations and decorations. And we really had to kind of work out how we handle those paratextual elements around the periodical poem. And then we started including undergraduate researchers in the work. I started regularly introducing my students to this work, and I was surprised about how much they enjoy indexing. Whenever I teach this in a class, I have at least one student who's like, there's an internship, can I do that, please? And so that's always a surprise to me that they're really that invested. So some of our insights there.
Great, thanks. Troy?
As I mentioned before, I initially was interested in the 3-volume novel format, and I had just no one knew how many of these had been published, so I just made a list. I went through the English catalog and highlighted all of them, and I on my own copy, not the library copy, but and so I had this list, and I thought, well, someone had said, well, it'd be probably, other people might find this list useful, so you just put it on the internet. And so in thinking through that, I thought a static list would not be as useful as some sort of database. And so really this happened quite accidentally. And then kind of a meeting with Patrick Leary, who I don't see in the attendees today. But I first met him at a Sharp conference, where I said, he of course, as he will, asks what I was up, researching what I was up to. And I said, oh, well, I've got this list of 3 novels that I want to put online. That very moment gave me the password to victorianresearch.org. Never met me before, but here's the keys to the kingdom, and just put it up there. And so that's what I did, and that's where it still is. So so just really quite accidental, and really thought that would be the end of it. I thought I'd just add all the 3-volume novels and just move on to something else. But it really kind of took on a life of its own, and it became kind of a what changed over time was really the scope and scale of it. I got a small grant to add 2-volume novels and 4-volume novels, of which there's like 19 4-volume novels in the Victorian period, in case you're wondering, and not just Middlemarch. And then obviously it became, well, 1-volume novels, the bulk of them. So so now we're adding those. And the other big change, I think, over time was, this was kind of a 1-person operation. And really the last couple of years ago, realizing the need, I need a team. I was kind of always jealous of Natalie, Lindsy, and April, having kind of a camaraderie. So I did create. It's more of a team-based structure now, which has been really wonderful. So I should mention Alan Riddell at University or Indiana University. Marie is one of my teammates. Matt Poland, who was at the conference earlier, and Jessica Tekeroff, who's in London right now, I think. She didn't come to the conference. She's busy. But so yeah, that's really the scope of it, and just kind of adding more things to the database, like genre information and serializations and things like that. It's kind of taken on, like I said, a life of its own. What surprised me the most along the way is to go back to the question of audience. When I put this up, I thought, oh, there's 12 people in the world that will find this interesting. And I've really been, one of my first emails that I ever got when I put it live was from a family genealogist who found her great-great-grandmother in the database after Googling her name. And she was a Victorian author, and she wrote to me. It's like, hey, do you want to know more about this author? And I was like, yes, I sure do. Sarah Ann Jeffries, I still remember exactly who it is, the author. And so yeah, so just kind of getting these random emails really, I mean, quite regularly, 3 or 4 a week, about books in the database, authors in the database, things like that. So yeah, it's been a really I've been very surprised at the audience for it. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Troy. And I know some people who are here were also at the previous session with Allison and Emily, and there are some, which is, there are some threads of connection, I think, between their experience and some of the things that came up in that discussion and what we're talking about too. All right, Marie.
So my project started out a bit like Troy's as a list. I was going to study penny bloods. And so the idea was I was going to read them all, but to know what I had to read, I had to come up with a list. So started out with an Excel spreadsheet, realized that the order in which you enter information is not necessarily the order in which you want to visualize it. And so thought, okay, right, that's what databases are for. And I tried to use the open office software for that, which at the time was really bad. Maybe it's better now, I don't know, but that was crashing. And then I stumbled on at the circulating library, Troy's project, and I emailed him and I asked, can I put my books into your project? And he was like, no, because they're like not 3-volume novels. And also I'm a control freak, but you can read this book. So apparently he's had the same advice to everybody, read this book, which I did. And I did really appreciate building it myself because it meant that I had great control over the data structure and could make it just as intricate as I thought it needed to be to fit that particular bibliographic genre with its own intricacies. But like Troy, I was thinking of it like a print bibliography, but it's HTML or PHP pages. Like you look at a print bibliography, but on the internet. And so it's all about displaying the name of the author, comma, title of the book in italics, and the way you write a bibliography. And it's not about displaying tables and all of that. And I find that's a huge difference, which with projects I'm seeing that started much more recently, where it's all about the tables and being able to select and filter through them. And I don't quite know what to do with that because I find that one of the ways my project was able to subsist through time was the fact that it had been written in very simple PHP and MySQL requests. And so I never finished my PhD. I left Cambridge, went back to Montreal, sort of dropped out of research and was invited to a Romanticism conference, even though I'm a Victorianist. And I met there Rebecca Nesbitt and other people who were like, oh, you're the person behind Price One Penny? Oh my God. And I didn't know that anybody was looking at my website, and that made me want to continue going to conferences. So I was an independent scholar. And I enjoy conferences, and that was great. And I have ties with the collectors community of Penny Bloods, one of whom was very happy that somebody was putting order into the whole thing and being very precise and accurate. So I had academic communities and the collector communities that were giving me a sense that what I'm doing is not completely useless, but also I'm doing this for fun. I'm not doing it for money. And so if I don't feel like doing it right now, that's fine. Everybody understands. And everything changed. And that's the biggest surprise for me. When I applied for the RSVP field development grant in 2020, after Troy told me, no, we cannot apply for at the circulating library because I am a member of the board, but you should apply. And I was like, why would they give money to a project that has been running for nearly 10 years? Clearly, I've demonstrated I can do it without money. And I ended up getting it. And that has been wonderful, bringing me back into the research community much more, because I felt beholden to the research community, and it allowed me to, also the pandemic allowed me to attend loads of virtual events like this. However, it came with a lot of anxiety because I was no longer just doing this for fun. I had gotten money to do it, and I needed to do good by that. And admittedly, I have not. I have still not produced an updated version of the website. And these new opportunities have allowed me to land this PhD gig I'm now in. And now I'm feeling the burden of these people who are changing venues all the time and need to start new projects, and you still need to finish the old one and all of that. So I'm sure that's not the main experience, but I have found that my independent scholarship probably helped the project along the way more than if I had gone into postdocs. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. It's wonderful to hear the stories of the projects, you know, the behind the scenes and the human part of that, which isn't visible on a website. So I know in some ways we've each sort of touched on this, but we thought we might talk a bit about specifically, like, how do you navigate changes in project scope, content, or personnel? If you have further thoughts about those kinds of changes. April?
Yeah, so I'm going to tackle these a little bit out of order and start with the personnel part, which, as we've mentioned, the collaborative part of what we do has been so central to our work. So we actually haven't had personnel changes. We've been doing this since 2010, and it's been the same three of us from day one to today, which is really exciting. The only change, which Lindsay mentioned a bit, was that we've added to working with our undergraduate students. So we and all of our programs don't really work very often with graduate students. So we're working with undergraduate students if we're bringing anybody into this project from the outside. But otherwise, it's been the three of us. And I think there's sort of three key things that I think have kept us together throughout all of that. And the first is really serendipity. This has been absolute good luck in a lot of ways to have jumped into this, as Lindsay mentioned, not fully getting what we were getting into, but jumping into this, and that we all worked so well together. We knew each other, and we've written about this some, but we knew each other in various ways, but we hadn't ever collaborated on anything before. This was the first thing we collaborated on, and we've been doing it for 12 years, which is good fortune indeed. And so that ebb and flow of kind of following our careers in that way, sort of following our lives in that way, I think has been really fortunate. The next thing is vulnerability. So that idea of trusting each other, we have, I think collaboration in general requires you to be very vulnerable with another person, which is something that we're not trained to do academically. We're trained to protect ourselves and protect what we think, and we're so trained to think about how people are critiquing us that I think it's hard to be vulnerable with other people. And we've very much learned to do that with each other, and that's been really important to our work together. And then flexibility. Our project has been really flexible because we've done it outside of institutional structures. Some of what Marie was talking about, that experience of not working within the institutional structure, we haven't applied for grants. And And I think some of that has given us a chance to do this as we've needed to, as our lives have changed, and our lives have changed a lot. We've all moved to different places since we've been working on this, a few cross-country moves along the way. We've had some major life upheavals, but that flexibility has really helped. And again, tying to what Marie was saying, I started this while I was a graduate student. I was a PhD student. And after that, I became an independent scholar. I was working in nonprofits in the corporate world for a while before I came back. And I think this project, one, helped me to find my way back into academia and into a tenure track position, but also that flexibility of just being able to follow our lives as we've shifted. I saw Marie's question in the chat. I had not really collaborated. I mean, at this point I was a graduate student, and there's really not a lot of places for graduate students to collaborate in our structure. I think we just don't see it as much. I hadn't had any real experience with collaboration at this level by any means, for sure, before we had done this. On the scope and content side, our scope has changed really significantly. We started out very specifically, and you can even see it on our the current version of our homepage. It says that we are indexing English language poems. We all felt really uncertain about, none of us were language specialists, none of us were specialists in translation. And so when we started this, we didn't include those, and it always was hanging over our heads. It was always in the background, like we know we're saying no to something that we really should be saying yes to. And so in the last 4 years, that has completely changed our project. So since 2018, we've completely reconfigured our data structure, in part around language. But we have since then, in the last 4 years, checked and updated all of our data 3 times, which means that one of the 3 of us has touched every single poem, around 4,000 to 5,000 poems, 3 different times in 4 years, in the midst of a pandemic as our side project. This is not our sort of primary project. And so that came about, 2018, we presented on, we thought we were about ready to release version 2.0. And we were presenting at Victoria at the RSVP conference. And we had a conversation, and actually Laurel Brake was one of the ones that asked a question that had been nagging us for a while about languages. We said, we have to do this. Like, this is the thing that we need to do. And so we put a pin in it. And in 2019, we had just started reconfiguring, and we're really starting to rethink our process and our data and everything else about it. And of course, 2020, things changed even more, and we really were rethinking all of what we did until we got to the point, I think this year, where we are ready not just to talk about languages and translation, but our entire user interface and everything else about how the project works. And that scope has really shifted everything about what we do. The part, I keep mentioning languages because I think that's the thing that has made the biggest paradigm shift in our project in the recent years. Before that, it was groups of poems. Groups of poems was another big paradigm shift much earlier for us. But we were really thinking about the multilingual nature of periodicals, not just the poetry, but of course how it's represented in the poetry, and the complexity of how languages other than English are represented. And it's not just that we're seeing poems in translation, which I think is the first sort of default answer. It's what we assume when we talk about multilingual, but that's not it. That's one small part of it. And so we had to configure data to understand that some of these are indeed poems in translation, but some of these are poems that are fully published in a language that is not English, a full poem in French or in Latin, assuming that readers are going to be following right along and picking up that shift in language. There are also poems that are not quite translation, but are inspired by, and we struggled well over a year in this sort of hazy space of what is a poem if it's based on or inspired by a French legend. How is this operating in connection to language, and how is that connection working? It's not a direct translation, but it's still dealing with language in interesting ways. And then of course, all of the other language on the page. So titles, subtitles, epigraphs. A poem in English that is not a translation still many times could have a Greek epigraph. And so thinking about the interplay of languages on the page has just completely changed the content and the scope of our project, I think, in really interesting ways. So I'll stop there.
Can I jump in, because my change in scope is very similar? The main one was to realize, at first I wanted to do, like, I was in English, so the usual, well, everybody knows translations and adaptations are not literature. And so those things should be excluded. But then realizing that the Dickens plagiarisms are part of what is most written about in terms of Penny Bloods. And I was also stumbling upon these translations or reprints. And I was like, no, okay, my scope will be purely bibliographic, and we'll see what I catch in that net. And I've ended up catching more than half of what is in there are translations, reprints, or adaptations. And I have also a source category. So if it's inspired by, adaptation tends to be more like it's a play, and now it's I actually use narrativization for that. So I haven't struggled too much with my taxonomy, but also I haven't tried to use anybody else's taxonomies, which might be more intelligent than doing my own thing. But yeah, that completely changed the project, because then it became about how Penny Bloods are at the intersection of lots of different popular cultures, as opposed to being this remnant of Gothic literature that subsists in the cheaper press. So yeah.
Yeah, to talk about the changes in project scope, content, and personnel, I think I've already kind of touched on all those. I think the one area that this also kind of goes to being kind of surprising was just the website itself and programming itself. I don't want to get too technical in the weeds here, but with this new version coming out the end of the year, I've kind of lost count. This will be the 6th or 7th public facing version of the website, probably 6th, that I've had since the beginning. And you would think, well, why do you have to keep changing what it looks like? Well, because programming languages change, you kind of forget about this. Like the original was written in a programming language called PHP version 5.0. Well, 7.0 came out a year or two ago, and it was not backwards compatible anymore. And so everything had to be rewritten. It wasn't just a find and replace kind of rewriting either, where you could just kind of change a few things. But that was something that I just never, like, you think, well, you just write it once and it's done. And just how much tinkering with not just the website, but the database itself that you have to do just to keep it operational has been surprising. And out of necessity early on, I taught myself the rudimentaries of the programming languages so I could write the site myself. Mostly, as Marie kind of points out, I had no money either to do this. I didn't have a DH institute to do it for me. So I really had to depend on myself, which in the long run turned out to be pretty fortuitous, because I can then go in and make these changes. And if someone else is working on, like, the newest version of the site is basically the first one where I've not done the programming. And that's been the weirdest feeling, after 14 years of basically building my own jalopy, I'm actually taking it to a mechanic to do it. And it seems, again, it just seems weird. It's nice that I can do this, but on the other hand, it's like you're handing your baby to someone else, right? So it's so yeah, just the, like, things that you would have never thought about, like, yeah, and then how these all have kind of these knock-on effects. Like, you change one thing in a database, you have to then reprogram a page, and you have to go redo something else on the website and things like that. And you just have to keep, you know, you just, there's never really an opportunity to kind of walk away, even from the, even from something that looks from the outside pretty static and pretty unchanging. So
The solution I'm thinking about, oh, go ahead, Natalie.
I just wanted to build on what Troy just said, because every change, changes that we tend to talk about changes at the technical level, like changes in the programming languages and so forth. But those are also, you know, there are also changes sort of at the theoretical level. Any ontological change in your, any change in your data ontology, any change in how you're conceptualizing your project goes hand in hand then with a whole set of technical changes. And sometimes the technical changes also then lead to some theoretical, you know, reconceptions of things. So technical work is always also theoretical work. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that in conversations like this. We're all kind of do-it-yourselfers on our projects, as you can tell. So that's definitely been one of the reasons we tend to chat with each other at in the hallways at RSVP about the kinds of things we're talking about here. So this might be a good moment to open it up. I'll let Marie comment. I know she was about to say something, but if people have questions or comments from the audience, we have other things we can keep talking about, but I'd love to open it up so we can have some conversational space here at the end of the conference. So you can put questions into the chat, or you can use the raise hand feature in Zoom. And I'll try to keep an eye on.
Well, I saw a question from Catherine in
Yes.
the, and I see that Allison also put the link to the endings project. I've not, I don't know how I missed it, but I'd never seen the endings project. So I'm curious to kind of go and look at it myself. But Catherine's question was about future proofing digital projects. And I have yet, and maybe the endings will prove me wrong, but I have yet to see any way of future proofing a digital project. You know, you have to keep paying the server bill. You know, someone has to keep paying that in perpetuity. Programming languages just randomly will just suddenly change and not work. You know, all sorts of things can go wrong. Just a quick anecdote. I know probably one of my DH heroes is Jerome McGann, and I once had dinner with him, and we talked about this idea of you know, preserving digital projects. And of course, he did the Rossetti project, and he finished it, quote unquote, and basically took it to his library and said, "Gee, can you preserve this? Because I'm done with it. I've created this wonderful thing." And they basically got back to him and said, "No, we don't know what, we can't, like, we don't have the resources, we don't have the you know." And their ultimately their recommendation was to print it out. Like, we know what to do with a book, so just print. He printed it out. Like, I thought this was insane, but it was 20 volumes, and you printed the thing out. So there's no answer to future proofing these things. I was going to use the metaphor of a child. Like, they don't stop being your child, they keep living, and you have to keep, you know, feeding them sometimes and checking in that they're alive. It shows what a great parent I am, I guess.
So the advice I'd have to give to Kathy ties into the comment I wanted to make. So first of all, don't do what I know that Troy and I did. Since we were working for ourselves, why the hell would you write what you're doing? Don't do that mistake. Write all the things. And one of the points I was making in the previous session was, and doing that work of documenting what we're doing should really count as publication. And then the other thing that hasn't popped up yet is separating your data from any form of interface with it. So digital projects are not websites. They should be data sets, and then the website gives you a way of interacting with that data set. And you might no longer have any sort of funding to update that interface. And at some point it might all be broken. But if the data that was behind it is well structured, well documented, and has been preserved in places like Zenodo and Figshare, and I think there's the Common Core, the Humanities Common Core thing. There are various places, also institutions have their own depositories. It's saying my connection is unstable, so I don't know how much of that you got.
Oh my God.
But so what I'm thinking about is my website might remain quite static, but with very clear instructions. If you want to play with the data, if you want to do some MySQL queries, you can either contact me and I'll do them, or go on GitHub and get the data and play around it with it as you want. So separating data and interface.
Are there other questions in the audience? Maria.
Not so much a question, but a comment as to how inspiring is to hear what has transpired in this session, because for researchers, and in my case, especially Marie, for independent scholars, all this data is so key. And the fact that you take the time to put all this and make it available, it makes a big difference for a lot of people. May your projects continue and be always successful living.
Well, thank you so much. That was very nice. It's I joked earlier in the conference. I live my life by the Thomas the Tank Engine motto, you know, to be a really useful engine. So I hope it's useful.
Something that, because these are long running projects, and I'm not sure if you had asked any of us in 2010 or 2012, like, would we still be doing this 10 years, 12 years later? I don't know that what we would have said, but we didn't go into this saying we're going to do this for over a decade. But with that, being able to look back over that, thinking about how you conceive of project milestones, as I think somebody else already said, like, this isn't like writing an article, like, where you know when you're done. You might not want to be done, but like, there comes a point where you decide it's done and it gets published, and then you can't go back and change it. And so the whole idea of milestones is something that's very different in a digital project as compared to the usual publication cycles for conventional scholarship. And so I think that's maybe something that I don't know if anyone has thoughts about how we conceive of project milestones and think about our work when it has a totally different time frame, and the sense of like completion is provisional.
Well, my answer to that is very simple. I just use the counters. So I always feel like every time I have another, so if I go from 21,000 novels to 22,000 novels, I feel like that's my accomplishment. And so I always keep an eye on the counter. It keeps me from going crazy, you know, like from thinking, you know, there's 60,000 Victorian novels. I'm only like a third of the way there instead of thinking like that. So.
I still haven't completely gone away from the idea of completion. There is a fixed amount of these things, which is much smaller than the fixed amount of Victorian novels of all sizes. I still think Troy is crazy, but yeah. So the best milestones for me as an independent scholar have been conferences. So I'm going to be presenting on this particular thing. So that thing needs to be finished. And otherwise, something we haven't talked about is links to other projects. And that was one of my main disappointments when I started branching out and looking for the sources of the texts I was working on, was there is no at the circulating library for French roman feuilleton. Like the best thing were appendices in a German book or article, I can't remember. Thank God for the Germans. And so these sorts of bibliographic projects, when they're interested in these international relationships, would really benefit from similar bibliographic projects in other language areas. And that is sadly, like, it feels like English lit is at the forerunner in this field.
Natalie, just to kind of jump in as well, and maybe pick up something that Ian has said in the chat about developing a definition of what's recognized in the field of digital work. I think for us, our project milestones have both been external and internal. And we often, because we're recognizing that we're doing this alongside the other projects we're doing, we have essays using and talking about our current processes, and those become milestones for us. But I think in general, thinking of a small update as the equivalent of an article, a major update is the equivalent of a bibliographic monograph. These are the ways I've had to talk about it with my own promotion committees and the way they're counting things, because this is different. And this is the equivalence. It does help that we are remediating the Wellesley Index to a certain extent. So I can point to the Wellesley Index was originally published in this kind of format with this number of volumes. And so it makes a clearer connection, I think, in terms of this work is now not in a print form, because it really is unwieldy in print form. It has to be digital to a certain extent. And so I think that there are ways to make those milestones be more visible in counting towards promotion and tenure.
And Allison in the previous session spoke very eloquently. She spoke to the value of publishing work that is incomplete or in a beta version, which is something that we haven't, we just put some of our changes on pause while we were then reconfiguring our data structure rather than publishing an interim version. And so that's definitely something for us that we're still learning to practice, because it is so different from the conventional academic model. But it is the great flexibility of digital projects that they can be updated and changed along the way. Priti, did you have a question? I thought I saw your hand. No? Okay. Okay.
Pitch to others who are thinking, I'm not doing anything big, so I don't need to worry about these issues. I would very much like for people to stop having spreadsheets that just sit on their computers and that they're ashamed of because they're not clean enough. And please start having people publish on GitHub and Zenodo and Figshare. And I think as a field, we need to start thinking about publishing data as counting as publication and not just as an appendix to an article. And I would hope that through that, it would incentivize the whole cleaning up process, which once you've written the article, why would you spend the time doing that? Because who's going to look at it and it won't count for any more. I would hope as a field we would move in that other direction.
That's a great point. Moving towards more sharing of data and more transparency around, data creation, data management, and so forth. It would be great to be able to have a directory of links to data sheets in Zenodo that but they have to be documented. You can't just hand somebody a set of CSV files. There has to be documentation about the decisions that went into creating the data, which are very complex and are not apparent from just looking at somebody's data structures on their CSV files. But I think your point is really important as we look to the future of not only of these projects, but of all the other kinds of work that are going on in the field. Troy.
Just to touch on that, initially I was very proprietary about my data. I was like, I didn't want to share it. I mean, I put it on the website, but like the database itself I kind of kept under wraps. But this kind of goes back to Catherine's question. I've kind of decided, like in sort of an evolutionary way, that the more copies of this data that are out there, the more likely it is to survive in the future. And so, several years ago, I started like allowing the data just to, people just to take it, take their own copies of it and do what they will with it. So, I think the idea of sharing data is I think key to do it. Yeah, and there are some now journals that basically review data sets or allow you to write about data sets.
And going back to Lindsay talking about working with undergraduates on this, but for me, like Troy's data sets have actually been in every single class I've ever taught, either on periodicals, Victorian literature, digital humanities. Like I use those data sets and my students play with them. And it's so great to have those out there if we're trying to train researchers to appreciate what we're doing. To see that is just so valuable, and to get to play with that and to know we're going to put it in Excel and you can't break this. You are not going to ruin Troy's website. You can play with this and mess it up as much as you want. And giving them, I do it with our data and also with Troy's, and let them sort of look at the same year or something like that. And those kinds of things can be so valuable for our students too.
Laurel, I see your hand, but I also see that it's 2:29 and I'm supposed to end this in 1 minute. So I want to say my thank yous, and then if anybody wants to stick around, we can have a little, I don't know, Erica, if we're going to get kicked out of the Zoom immediately. But I did just want to say thank you to everyone for attending the last session of the conference. And thank you to Jennifer and to Fanula and the many, many people whose names I don't even have all of them in front of me who worked to put this event on. It's a tremendous amount of work to put on any conference, especially a digital conference. This online conference has been extremely successful. I've been amazed at the level of conversation, and that's due not only to all the work behind the scenes to organize and set things up, but also to the willingness and energy of the participants who have really made this an exceptional experience. So huge appreciation and thanks and applause for everyone who's been part of this and who made this happen. It's really been a wonderful experience and an honor to be the concluding panel of the weekend. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for all the information shared in the chat. And okay, Erica just posted the Zoom will run for half an hour more. I'm happy to stick around for a little bit, and chat a little more. If anyone else wants to, we'll be the people standing in the hotel presentation room until they come and kick us out. But if you need to leave, please go ahead, feel free to leave. So Laurel, you're muted.
Yes, you know, when I was first involved in a digital collaborative project, I was forcibly reminded by colleagues about all the tombstones along the way, you know, and I'm listening to this conversation, and I mean, you know, I thought Kathy's question about future-proofing, you know, and the underlying issue here, you know, I mean, the great thing about all these projects is that you all have made them, and you're with them, and you're continuing them. And, you know, as I listened to Troy's, you know, account of the, you know, the reiterations, you know, of what you have to do for maintenance and so on, and the, you know, the kind of transformations as you want to change things and so on. I mean, it's unlike, you know, the first edition of your book, isn't it? You put it on the library shelf, and maybe it will go into paperback, and maybe it will go online, and maybe that you'll have an opportunity to change it in a second edition, but maybe not. You know, maybe it has a really limited life, you know, which is clear and no one thinks about too much. And of course, the paper book has a longevity, right? Which doesn't require the high level of maintenance that digital projects do. And I'm thinking about the economic constraints, you know, which we certainly have felt in Britain, or, you know, in projects that are funded, and they're funded for a limited period of time. And then, you know, you're just left to the forces of, you know, the economy, really, you know, and how long you can keep going back to sources which, you know, departments change, universities change, money, you know, disappears, melts, deans leave, you know, I mean, you know, and the whole, and indeed the project may become much less important to the field. I mean, that's another possibility, you know, unless you are really willing, and you're getting older, you know, and personnel change, right? You know, I mean, it seems to me that it's like a life, the digital, you know, the project of the digital work. It is like a life, and it's in an economic, you know, configuration sometimes, and then you have you people here who are, you know, the only begetters and are keeping at it and keeping them alive. I'm just interested in, you know, seems to me there are institutional constraints which you are very happily managing. You know, all of you who have spoken here tonight, but I do think projects still die, a lot of them, you know, and maybe they don't entirely die because the data sets are still accessible. I just wondered what you thought about this, you know, about, I mean, it does raise the question of all the digitized, this is different, but all the digitization of the books of our libraries, of course, that are being, you know, substituted for the paper copies, and their lives. You know, what's the life expectancy of those digitized items and objects? Anyway, kind of discuss. I don't know.
You're absolutely right, Laurel, that
Yeah.
a lot of projects from the beginning have to operate under certain institutional constraints, whether it's you know, a grant-funded project, or it's somebody's dissertation project that has to operate within a certain timeline. You know, our project, we deliberately set up independent of any one of our universities, which since we've all changed universities, that's been very useful, that we weren't linked to one. But I think I'm certainly very aware, and in some ways, I think this is true for Troy and Marie as well. Like we are maybe not the norm in that sense, because it's not, you know, a specific 3-year funding cycle and that sort of thing. So back to the previous thread about like archiving data separate from websites, I think it's absolutely crucial for projects that reach an endpoint for personnel, economic, or technological reasons. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to Laurel's comments. Troy, you looked like you were about to.
Well, I don't know if there's much to add, but yeah, I think about I think about this mortal plane quite a bit, actually.
Yes.
With I remember when I started this project, I met Peter Garside at a conference, and I told him what I was up to, and he of course did the romantic novel bibliography, and he kind of took one look at me and he's like, "Thank God you're young," and I'm not so young anymore. But yeah, it's it's almost like estate planning. I have to figure out what I'm going to be doing with this project, and now that I've, part of the reason for kind of building out to a team is it's less dependent on my life, so to speak. I know this all sounds very morbid, but yeah, Patrick had a question. Save us from ourselves.
Well, I was just going to raise and I've done this before, raise the issue as to whether RSVP in particular has a role to play as an oasis, for orphaned projects. It can't. As Ian would remind us, if we're here, we don't have our resources are not infinite, and 2.5 million doesn't buy what it used to. But I think there is, it's worth talking about whether it would be worthwhile setting up a process, an evaluative process, in which projects could be that had outlived their funding cycles, but were still valuable resources for the field, could be, I don't know, hosted or kept alive, basically, kept alive to do their good works and help all of us scholars by, relatively modest interventions by RSVP. I mean, the great thing about the current index is that it basically has perpetual funding, because that was Eileen's baby, and there's almost nothing else like that. I know that's not a model for anything else, but I would like to think that that RSVP could be a place where at least some of the most important of these things could be saved.
Maybe to evaluate that, we would need an inventory of the current digital projects that touch upon Victorian periodicals. And there's an article out about how you should never start a directory. So that's not what I'm suggesting, but to get a sense of how much we'd be talking about. And then I know some people at Oxford that have been in charge of keeping projects alive and have found it a tremendous headache. And we could see if it's comparative numbers and therefore comparative headaches, or if we're talking about much smaller numbers.
Well, Oxford is a good example. Does anybody remember the Internet Library of Early Journals? Remember this? Came along in the 90s. And it stayed out there for years and years, long after it had been basically abandoned. And yet it has been archived in a really thoughtful way by Oxford, so that it has, it has links to other copies of the journals and things like that. So it's not floating internet space junk. It is actually, still retains some vestigial usefulness, even 2 decades on. So I think there's and as far as the process, I think it would have to be just like a grant application process, where there'd be a committee, people would, for doing this kind of evaluation.
As treasurer in waiting, I've been taught one thing by Ian is to say no. That there is no money for that.
I was just gonna say, I was looking to see if he's here. I don't think he is anymore, but
he had to leave because there's an important soccer match on right now.
okay. Well, what I was gonna say is, if Ian were here, he would say the perils of the stock market have shown that we should not. That we should be very careful about how we spend our money, and that we can sustain it long term. Since we've been talking about sustaining these kinds of projects and how difficult it is. So I think we had a conversation, we've had conversations about this before in our planning committee. Patrick, Joanne, among others, Jim Mussel have been in on these conversations. And I think we all would love to be able to do a project like you're describing, Patrick, and Bob Nicholson proposed a year and a half or 2 years ago, I guess it would have been something similar, that we create some kind of clearinghouse, or that we use our website to house projects. But yeah, I think I like what Marie said, though, is what are we even talking about here? Like, what is the scope of what this would entail, or how would you even conceptualize it? And then what is the excess of money in the budget that could be counted on annually? You know, according to Ian, there isn't any. I don't know if that's a very conservative view, but it is true that if you're looking to longevity of the organization, that's where he stands on, you know, as our longest serving treasurer, I believe.
Think Noah's Ark. That's what I'm thinking.
Oh, yeah. That's a good.
You know how much it costs to feed all those animals?
I would like to support, you know, some exploration of this, as Patrick has described. I think, you know, I mean, it's about the, you know, I understand what you're saying about money and, you know, the problem of choice and selection and evaluation and so on, but maybe it could be looked into making it somehow a project that was manageable. I mean, how it might be managed, if we could, if we thought intellectually the society could be crucial about maintaining certain resources. I mean, yeah, you know, maybe the alternative is that we lose them entirely. And that's a very serious matter, it seems to me. And some of them.
An alternative and potentially like future looking point of view in my mind would be to think specifically about the challenges of linking up data within our specific field, because another way to go about doing this would be to make sure we preserve the data in a way that it's reusable for future projects. And one approach is document what you've done, and then people will be able to understand what you've done and work from there. Another approach could be to come up with very clear guidelines about this is how we think about Victorian periodicals. These are the types of relationships you find within periodicals, between people, between texts, between illustrations and texts. Maybe that's a worse idea because it's a pipe dream and it couldn't be, but that could be an alternative. Thinking about how to make the data as reusable as possible, as opposed to how can we maintain the website as it currently is.
I was sort of hoping that our new treasurer would be a little bit more of a yes man, but Patrick is nodding. I wonder though if a first step, which would not, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, would not require a lot of money, would not be to actually do what I thought Marie was starting to suggest, but then they backed away, was to actually just create a directory of sorts on the RSVP page, which is like here are the websites that are existent that are relevant for Victorian, and just have that link. So that becomes a way for us to start. I'm seeing all sorts of chat comments where people are like, well, there's this other thing, but then we can begin to actually sort of see what's the scope. And that might help us build, and what's coming to the end of its life, or coming to the end of the person who runs its life. So that may need a little bit more help, and that just becomes a way to do that first step work. And then maybe somebody will give us another $2.5 million and we can do the second step work that Patrick is calling for.
I'll take off my treasurer hat for a second here. It's really, in some ways, it's not a question of money, in the sense that RSVP has we pay for server space. I mean, server space nowadays, memory is incredibly cheap. I mean, back in the 90s, it was hundreds or thousands of dollars to host a site. Now it's like $10. So I mean, in some ways, it's not a question of money. It is a question, and I kind of talked about this earlier, is it's maintenance. I mean, the reasons libraries don't want to take this on is because, the site works today, tomorrow it doesn't work. Next week, it might not work. Who's going to fix it? Who's going to maintain it? And that kind of maintenance can be costly, right? And so it's not really the sort of present. So I myself am interested in this because I have kind of a horse in this race, because I would like someone to preserve my site someday. But it's a question of scale, probably. It's this question of format, really. If your website has like lots of bells and whistles, likely that's not going to be able to be preserved indefinitely. If the heart of your site is a MySQL database, that is probably pretty stable going forward. I mean, that can be preserved, potentially. So it's just kind of a question of like what kind of parameters we put around it, what kind of what kind of technical, the simpler the site, the longer it'll last. Things like that.
Well, the obvious advantage to having a scholarly society
Right.
involved in this is that it's not dependent on individuals. I mean,
well, correct. That's
so if you're,
I'm for that.
if you got hit by a bus tomorrow, why couldn't RSVP, in theory, keep your site going indefinitely? I mean, I actually pay the hosting fees for your site, and you're right, not very much. They're not very much, but I'm not going to be around forever either.
But so, if I do get hit by a bus, and as long as you're paying the server fees, yeah, it'll keep going. But when they change PHP from 7 point whatever to 9 point whatever, and it suddenly doesn't work, are you and or your heirs going to fix it? I mean, that's
no, I'm not. But our RSVP's Noah's Ark committee could cost out what it would take to hire somebody to do the upgrade. And that's
kind of, putting my treasurer hat back on for a second. I mean, but that's the unknown. It's like it's a known unknown, to use Weasley speech. We know it will cost money to maintain it. We don't know how much, and that's the question.
Well, we can't do everything, but why not try and do
it? We could. I mean, there could be.
We already have a grant to get people to build resources that are important to all scholars. And because they've got our grant money, they take our grant money, it has to be publicly accessible to everybody. So we already do that. Why can't we, have a fund that at least attempts to, to keep some of these things, useful for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I think the issues definitely could be explored, but I think there's a lot more. There's a lot of kind of moving parts in that. There's sort of technical issues, there's money issues, there's particular types of expertise. It's not about just renting server space.
No, it's the nature of the medium.
Yeah. I mean,
It is the nature of the medium. Absolutely. I mean, we have, we're all aware of that. We are aware of that. And so we're really talking about, damage limitations and how we might, contribute very sparingly, no doubt. I mean, it's like building a library, right? I mean, when they built libraries, they had to take into account, shelving space, maintenance, staffing, students. Yeah, I mean,
But as Jim pointed out, even the British Library messed up.
I mean, just to
Yeah.
support what Jennifer was saying and what Ian would say in his absence. We're lucky to have this endowment from Eileen Curran. It's made us very sustainable as a scholarly society. We're exceptionally lucky, and in the scheme of things, we're now well endowed. But we couldn't afford to build a library, and to use Laurel's analogy. I mean, I think Pretty has given some practical suggestions for smaller scale projects, and also Marie. But I think at this stage, we do have to be mindful that, whatever the endowment is, it is not endless, and we could easily lose much of it by a mistake.
We could also get more endowments, right? I mean, the whole thing is a moving part. I mean, it seems to me the future is very porous in that way.
And, there are, and I know there've been some references in the chat, and Patrick and Marie's comments about what Oxford and so forth. These are not problems that RSVP alone is confronting. And so part of the work of a committee, if there's going to be a committee that's just, I would call it like an exploratory committee to begin finding out who's doing these kinds of things at other, institutions, whether those are libraries or nonprofits or other scholarly societies. We don't have to always be building the wheel, but learn, I think there's a lot to learn from our colleagues in information sciences.
Yeah.
Trevor Owen's book, who somebody had put in the chat, is a great resource on this, and so forth. But I think, this has been a really rich and interesting conversation. Like, these are all really important concerns and ideas.
Can I just ask, can we, Erica, will you share or save the chat and maybe, thank you.
It'll all be saved, yeah.
Well, you've given planning a whole lot of things to think about. Thanks very much. That's great.
Well, I mean, a lot of people have been thinking about these questions, and there's been no good solution up till now.
I think Michael had a comment.
Oh, Michael. Sorry.
Yeah, I would like to, if I might, add to the responsibilities of the Noah's Ark Committee, because there's a parallel threat of maintaining the paper record, not just the digital record, but the paper record. Libraries are under great pressure to economize. They have real needs, and they think that if they can collaborate and identify a copy of a book in a consortium, that will meet everyone's needs, and that will not meet our needs. So we need to have access to multiple copies of our research evidence, because multiple copies vary. So I proposed in a paper I put up a couple of weeks ago for this conference that RSVP takes some official cognizance of the fact that librarians have this agenda, and work with them to inform them that agenda is not the best route for the kind of research that we do. I think the Noah's Ark Committee could take that on, because what we're talking about is preserving the evidence, digital evidence and material evidence. We need both, and we need to worry about them, as we're doing right now about the digital. I'm worried about the material. The precedent is that libraries agreed that the JSTOR project would free up a lot of space for 20th century scholarly journals. And so it did. And all over the United States and parts of England, I think, libraries were able to say you could just use the digital version. And that may be okay for the scholarly journals that we use all the time. I'm a heavy JSTOR user, but it's not okay for the 19th century periodicals that we go to see what people saw when they read those journals. Many people have pointed out the inadequacy of the digital for those purposes, but we may be at risk of losing our stock of evidence. So I'd like the committee to take that into account too. The question is how, as a practical matter, could RSVP work with these library consortia? I mean, this is a small organization. They're large organizations, and there are many of them. There are more than a dozen. And I do think that they would benefit, and we would benefit from our professional advice.
Well, we could maybe start by trying to do a panel at ALA.
That's a good idea. I will say, I should tell you that I brought this question generally to the MLA a year ago in the 25th anniversary of the MLA statement on the importance of keeping the original records. And the audience for that, this was online, digital audience. It was a large group, 40 people. Most of them were librarians, not scholars. And they were more or less politely resistant to the idea that we could give them professional advice. There's that element. That's an important one. And you can see that in the library literature too. They have their expertise and do not need more expertise. I definitely was aware of that in the meeting. But nonetheless, I think that we need to have them save more of our stuff.
Thank you, everybody. I'm mindful that we're about to get kicked out of the Zoom. I do feel like we really got away with something, having a whole extra half an hour. I appreciate, Erica, you staying around for that. I appreciate all of you staying around for this very rich conversation. I'm leaving with all sorts of ideas from. It's really been a lovely, nice little coda to what has been just a wonderful conference. Thank you again to everyone involved in making this happen. It's been really great to see you all on Zoom too. So
Thank you all for a wonderful session.
Yeah, brilliant.
Lots to follow up on. Excellent ideas.
So long, guys.
Thank you.
bye, everybody.